Alright, there is no sense in trying to pussyfoot around this. I love Excel Saga to death, it's one of my favorite anime of all time, and I am stoked to finally get to talk about it here on Anime Abandon. I can't rightfully say when I first saw Excel Saga, but I must have been around 14 or 15 years old. I had heard, rumbling through the high school anime club grapevine, that there was one anime that apparently was so outrageous and crude that it couldn't be shown on Japanese television. My teenage mind ran a flurry of what it could possibly be, since this was 2004 or 5 and I had little information to go on. I was familiar with films like Jinro and Ghost in the Shell, and so my thinking was that if those were allowed, but this mythical anime wasn't, it must have been a goddamn snuff film. I had to see it. Eventually, I found out that the anime in question was Excel Saga, and it was actually only one episode that was banned from television. Still, had to see it. I scoured the internet, trying my absolute damnedest to pirate the shit out of this veritable anime treasure, being that this was still the mid-2000s where you could conceivably download anything and everything for free without a torrent client. Kids, ask your older brothers or sisters if they were Clan Kazaa, Grokster, or LimeWire. But try as I might, I was unable to find myself this elusive episode and all seemed lost until one fateful day, it finally dawned on me. I could just rent the DVD at my local store. Once again, mid-2000s. Lo and behold, the DVD with that episode on it was there for me to rent, and I snapped it up and nearly broke my PS2's disc tray trying to get the damn disc in there. And what I watched immediately hooked me. It didn't matter that the episode that I was looking for was the last episode, so ostensibly I was watching the end of the series not knowing anything about what happened previously. I loved every single minute of it, regardless. It was one of the funniest shows I had ever seen. And nearly 15 years later, it still is. Now, creating an Anime Abandon episode on a comedy is always a huge problem for me, because ultimately it reduces my role in the show to being Bob Saget just playing curator to the clips themselves. However, a good comedy is even worse for me because I'm just spoiling jokes that I want everyone to see for themselves. But Excel Saga is a unique kind of difficult in that I feel it is a great comedy, but I can't recommend it to just anyone. Why?
Now, all you people of the ignorant masses, sweat your blood out for the coming day of birthday! Don't wipe your tears! Let's work! Don't stop! Move and stop! Work until you drop! Lord Palazzo, your Excel is working hard for you!
It's that kind of anime. Yes, it's a mile-a-minute, breathless, sight-gag-driven romp with a lead character that is purposefully and aggravatingly obnoxious to the nth degree, filled to the brim with pop culture references, both anime and non, and also heavily steeped in jokes about everyday Japanese life, circa 1999. This is not an easy comedy if this is your first time watching it, and it's also not a great series to binge watch either. Watching Excel Saga is sort of like having a slice of birthday cake. The first one is fine, and if you stop right there, you could go about your day just dandy. But if you try to double down and have one after the other, you're going to be begging for the sweet release of death. So yeah, kind of on my back foot with this one. Thus, if it's all the same to you guys, I'm going to try my best to talk about the series generally speaking, touching upon a few themes, characters, recurring gags, and mostly keeping it vague and non-specific enough for that people who haven't seen it before can leave the episode with enough knowledge to make the decision of watching it for themselves, or not. You know, like a review. I will be talking about a few specific scenes and instances that stick out to me as the show's finest moments, but I will be throwing up the spoiler warning before I do. Because, like I said, I want as many people as possible to see Excel Saga, but I will not miss my chance to gush when one presents itself. But, first things first. What in the hell is this head trip supposed to be about anyway? This here is Excel.
You know, as of late, I haven't been appearing all that much, and I have to wonder if it is because of my ego, a conspiracy of the producers, or if it's simply the result of a haphazard way the writers pull everything out of their butts at the last minute in between their frequent substance abuse breaks.
Let's see, how do we put this delicately? She is a stark raving mad bitch who can power all of China with her ceaseless energy.
Dust me off and you'll find embarrassing secrets! Rub harder and mysterious fluids will come out!
Excel, if you can guess, is just a codename of hers, a necessary bit of subterfuge for her work with the Underground Association across. Her saga is an ongoing tale of her attempts to take over the world one city at a time, starting with the local city, F-City. She does this in the name of not only Across, but also her much beloved, and equally much beleaguered, Lord Il Palazzo.
Oh,
Her repeated trips to the grave and back are made possible not by the Phoenix Force, but by something less OP in the great will of the macrocosm, essentially a galactic reset button for the purposes of keeping the story on rails. Or so she says.
You cannot die, Excel. Life is too valuable, but more than that, consider the storyline.
Did I not mention that this is also the most meta comedy since Monty Python and the Holy Grail? Hell, her first mission for Across is to kill her original creator, the manga artist Koshi Rikdo.
Ah, you didn't see that.
Oh.
Nope, nothing to see at all. Not at all. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Hey, you watch your eyeline, mister.
From here on out, the show plays out episodically, with a few callbacks and plot details that are kind of touched upon here and there, although it feels like it's done in protestation. It's as if the anime doesn't want to actually tell a story, but does so because, well, it has to. I mean, just look at your typical plot of an episode. A harebrained scheme is cooked up by Across, Lord Il Palazzo informs Excel of her mission, Excel meets a number of one-off characters in her mission, which ends in utter failure nearly every time, even with the help of her right-hand gal and straight man, the soft-spoken Martian princess Hyatt, who is also a hemophiliac.
I'm looking forward to Wow, I guess the censors were repressing Hachan too. She was holding a whole lot in. Yay, bloody shampoo and conditioning!
The only real change in the operations for the first 20 or so episodes is with the addition of Hyatt by the end of episode 2. Otherwise, it's rinse and repeat. But again, telling a story is not what this anime is about. From the early get-going, you could tell why the anime was tagged with the title Quack Experimental Anime. Each episode is an experiment, usually framed as Koshi giving the okay, whether under duress or not, to the anime staff to turn his manga into a parody of common anime and film tropes. Romantic comedies, political thrillers, cheesy 80s action movies, they're all lampooned through this obvious but nonetheless effective mechanic. I think what I most admire about Excel Saga is that it doesn't care about subtlety in the slightest. Every joke, every reference, every scene goes for the throat each and every time. And this notion is summed up perfectly in the Poochus.
Come and get me, you evil Dapperware motherfucker! It's so good after all!
A deliberately unexplained entity in the story, the Poochus are pretty much a constant in the story after their introduction, but they're hardly the threat they were introduced as by mid-series. They're a sort of catch-all, kawaii creature that initially tried to take over the world with their cuteness, but become literal punching bags before too long. And heaven help me, every time one of the Poochus is killed off in a bludgeoning, bloody death, I laugh myself silly. Mostly because the dub ad-libs a bunch of nonsense phrases as they're killed off.
Oh, that shot us a ball. Why are you kill me so easily?
Oh, it's so cute. But I'm afraid I don't really like cute.
If you know me and my tastes at all, that last clip especially tells you why this series speaks to me on a fundamental level. By the by, these nondescript dweebs are Excel's neighbors that slowly become Across's, well, I want to say adversaries, but that implies they have direct and opposing contact with each other, and they never really do. Again, that being the joke. They basically form a Power Ranger knockoff squad called Municipal Force Daitenzen, and this is where the Japanese slice of life jokes come into play.
This is fun! But we're running out of evil to fight, even the really insignificant stuff!
Damn it! The people in the city are just too goddamn law-abiding. I mean, look! They're crossing at the crosswalk properly!
And where the series itself is at its weakest. Not wanting to put too fine a point on it or anything, but the difference between the manga and anime is that while Excel Saga was always a comedy, the manga attempted to tell an actual story, fleshing out the characters' histories and backstories that, quite frankly, are just more bizarre than hilarious or compelling. The anime, meanwhile, throws nearly everything out the window, but the most barest of essentials and characters. Excel Saga is its own anime, perhaps more than any other anime based off a manga that I have covered, and that is thanks in whole to the director Shinichi Watanabe, or as he's known in the anime proper, Nabeshin.
I'm Nabeshin. Don't mind me.
Hey, Brett! That's right, the director put himself in the anime. And also made himself a badass.
Bastards!
And that is how you write a Gary Stu, people. Don't even pretend for a single moment that he isn't, and make it as blatant and as obvious as possible. I mean, if you're gonna do it with fucking fireworks. It's pretty easy to see why Nabeshin works within the world of Excel Saga the anime. He himself is a walking constant joke.
Don't worry, Master! Excel shall uphold your legacy, so please rest in peace!
I ain't dead.
And more than that, he figures very heavily into what makes Excel Saga actually weirdly endearing, which has little to do with Excel herself. I don't think it's going out on a limb to say that Excel as a character is incredibly difficult to latch onto as a protagonist. Her entire shtick is to be as annoying as possible, so that when she receives her karmic punishment and a bit of slapstick, you remove all sense of empathy and just laugh at her misfortune. But as the series rolls on, and her bouts of painful comeuppance keep piling on, the return on investment becomes less and less. Hence why binge-watching Excel Saga is not really advised. Some of you might remember me talking about how performing the role of Excel caused the actor, Jessica Calvello, to blow out her voice midway through the series. And considering all the takes she had to do...
I fallen again! Do you enjoy watching this pretty girl falling? Oh, you do?
I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner. Nothing but respect here at HQ for doing the job and doing it as admirably as she did. Calvello, you have certainly earned the voice actor's Purple Heart. If the show was entirely about Excel and Hyatt's repeated failures, it would still be a funny anime, but not nearly as watchable, or rewatchable, I think is the better term. Thankfully, there is a side story that runs completely parallel to Excel's hijinks, the series of unfortunate events of Pedro Domingo, the Colombian migrant worker.
Thanks to you, Pedro is able to regain the joy of working under the hot sun. Pedro's tears are once again flowing like waterfalls.
A complete invention of the anime, the story of Pedro the migrant worker is a continually hilarious and surprisingly sympathetic tale. Spoilers, by the way. From his death in the first episode to his eventual reincarnation and epic fight to save his wife, the Great Will of the Macrocosm, Pedro's side plot never ceases to be the highlight of the episode when the story checks back in with him. In fact, an entire recap episode was made just to tell Pedro's story up until that point, and it's actually better than some of the full standalone episodes.
Are you alright, mi corazón? Oh. Pedro is on fire with anger.
You're just never sure where the hell Pedro is going to wind up, or how he'll get there. And when Nabeshin shows up to basically be Pedro's Master Roshi / Kamiguru, I'm just left in stitches. It's manic beauty at its finest, and it does a lot to deflect the accusations of Excel Saga just relying too heavily on sight gags and being lol random. But not entirely. I feel that a critique that could be laid against Excel Saga is that it exemplifies the cringy, try-hard, volume-based humor of the mid-2000s, and it's not an unreasonable one to make. And with all the references and parodies that show up unannounced and disappear as quickly as they come up, and the constant stream of consciousness jokes with little if any formal setup, it's really easy to compare it to Family Guy. Jeez, you would have thought I just said Voldemort in the middle of Hogwarts. As much as the name brings out the vitriol on the internet, we would be remiss to forget the fact that the reason why Family Guy exists is because the internet demanded its return. We thought it was funny, because there was hardly anything like it at the time. And I'm not talking about its plot or story structure. What I am talking about is its cavalier style of humor. Both shows paid no heed to plot or setting when it came to their jokes. If they wanted to crack one, they did it, even if it made no logical sense to do it and would only wind up interrupting the flow of the story. And it was forgiven because it was funny. But where Excel Saga made out, where Family Guy didn't, was that it ended after 26 episodes, whereas Family Guy, well, you know. I suppose you can take all of this to mean that Excel Saga benefited by knowing when the joke was over and when to call it quits, and that at the end of the day, its biggest sin is that its humor was of the time and hasn't aged very well. And I think that's a fair cop. If Excel Saga were made today, the references would certainly be more up to date, though a few classics would slip through. I don't think anyone is going to turn their nose up at a Gundam parody. And I also think if it were made today, it would not benefit from being one of the arguably first popular anime comedies in America. Not to say that anime before it wasn't or couldn't be funny, but when you actually look back and really break it down, there were very, very, very few pure anime comedies available in America. Action comedy, oh yeah, plenty of that. Same thing goes with romantic comedies and sci-fi comedies. But just comedy? That's a lot harder to come by. I mean, for every Cromartie High School or Azumanga Daioh, there's a dozen other anime that have funny scenes, but they're not pure comedies. And while there were some anime comedies that did make its way to the States, hell, I even reviewed a few of them here on Anime Abandon.
It's beautiful, truly beautiful. I feel right at home here.
None were able to reach that level of popularity that Excel Saga did, or leave a lasting impact like Excel Saga did either. And in my opinion, rightfully so. Still, any comedy, no matter how sharply written, will fall apart without the cast to back it up. And here in Excel Saga, we had ADV's finest hour. Which is normally a backhanded statement, but here it's meant with all sincerity and praise. Everyone from top to bottom played their characters to a perfect T, matching the high energy levels of the animation while maintaining coherency. And when the anime has a rare, quieter moment, the cast still hits the right note without missing a beat.
A flying croissant.
Special shoutouts must go to Rob Mungle and Brett Weaver in their roles as Pedro and Nabashin. The two individually are side-splitting, especially with Mungle putting on a performance that is equal parts telenovela and Arkham Asylum resident.
Sandora, you're going to have a brother!
Thank you, Papa!
Why? Does this mean even when she was with me, my wife and Gomez were? No!
But together, they make Pedro's entire story what it is.
You must go here to be trained.
But this is...
A holy ground for self-polishing. Nevis Hole!
To say anything more about Excel Saga would be redundant. There's only so many ways you can wax poetic on the singular thought of, I love this, please go see it now. Thanks to Funimation, the show was saved from the ADV scrap pile back in 2011, with the complete series widely available on DVD. It's also streaming on Crunchyroll, so yeah, no excuse not to see it. Unless you have a migraine.
They say that absence makes the heart grow fonder, so maybe Lord of Palazzo will love me more!
What the hell do you want, Excel?
Oh, I love you so fucking much.
In that case, take some Excedrin. And speaking of medicine, I think it's time we went to go see anime's resident surgeon. Till next time.